There's no reason for this to devolve into armed conflict. We don't believe that conflict is inevitable here.
Tonight on the Donlin Report, does peace between Russia and Ukraine depend on a phone call between Presidents Biden and Putin tomorrow? Plus, remain in Mexico back in effect at our southern border. What changed today? And was this photo from a congressman the best idea, especially in the wake of the Michigan school shooting? We have both sides of that debate for you. Great to have you with us as we start a new week. Live from our News Nation Chicago headquarters, the Donlin Report starts right now. Hello, President Biden facing major issues here at home, but add to that challenges from Russia and China. That is the pulse of America tonight. Starting with Russia, President Biden will speak by phone tomorrow morning with Vladimir Putin. And all indications are Russia is preparing to invade Ukraine in the new year. As Ukrainian troops prepare for a possible Russian incursion, Putin sending 175,000 troops to the border. That's according to intelligence officials. Those officials also pointing to Putin's covert actions as proof of how serious he is about ultimately invading, perhaps as early as next year. The Biden administration holding what Axios describes as intense conversations with allies and Russia ahead of this phone call tomorrow. So what else can President Biden do other than sanctions? And how far can sanctions actually go? Meantime, Ukraine's defense minister releasing a video showing everyday citizens joining the fight to defend the country. And they tell you who they are.
Начальник отдела продаж.
Я прораб.
Я программист. Я свидетель на свадьбе.
So that's Russia and Ukraine. Now let's talk about China, where today the White House officially announced a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Games starting in February.
The Biden administration will not send any diplomatic or official representation to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics. The athletes on Team USA have our full support. We will be behind them 100% as we cheer them on from home.
The boycott is intended to send a message to China about their human rights abuses. But does anyone really think that message will be received? China, meantime, looking into building a military base on Africa's Atlantic coast. According to the Wall Street Journal, that would be a first. How big a deal is that? Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will be blunt with a blunt but scary assessment of China's recent activity near Taiwan as well. Here's what he said about that.
It looks like a lot like them exploring what their true capabilities, and sure, it looks a lot like rehearsals.
So there you have it. Two world powers who are allies, neither of whom fans of the United States, ramping up aggression. While President Biden considers sanctions and boycotts, what else can the U.S. do? Joining us now to discuss, Christian Whiten, former State Department senior advisor, and Mike Baker, former CIA operative who now heads the Portman Square Group. Christian, let's start with you on this. What is Putin's play here? What's he trying to do and why?
Well, you can't depend on this, but there's a decent chance this is a bluff. Putin is making a point, and the point is he is extremely upset that Ukraine continues to, in his view, invite in foreign forces, foreign power right up against another one of Russia's borders. And most alarmingly, that Putin and NATO and the that Ukraine, NATO, and the United States are talking about adding Ukraine to NATO. NATO saying they have an open door. I don't mean to imply there's moral equivalence between the United States and Russia, but we would be very upset if Russia was forming a military alliance with Canada and Mexico. So Putin, in a similar vein, very upset at the possibility of NATO hauling up to yet another portion of Russia's border. So he's expressing that displeasure with the show of force. It's an impressive show of force, but, balanced against that, you generally don't give 2 or 3 months notice if you're going to invade another country. And Ukraine actually has a larger army than what Putin has put on Ukraine's border.
So, Mike, Pentagon says, they don't think conflict is inevitable. I guess that's not a surprise, maybe, that they would say that, but it sure seems like it is. I mean, we talked about the possibility of 175,000 troops. That's according to U.S. intelligence. This, as I understand it, would be the largest military operation in Europe if it goes forward and they do invade Ukraine since World War II.
Yeah, it seems bizarre, surreal that we would be talking about a land invasion in Europe in this day and age. But Christian's absolutely right. Look, the problem that Putin has is this NATO issue, right? I mean, Putin has been very clear about his desire to reconstruct the former Soviet Union in some part, right? And so this is he takes it personally, and it's as if imagine if we were somehow engaging with Taiwan in sort of a two-China policy. You can imagine what China's reaction would be. So this is very similar. Is it likely that the U.S. administration and the NATO and other allies would somehow engage in a military response? I think it's almost out of the question. There's no way, and I think that Putin has made that calculation. So what are our options? The White House has already said economic sanctions. Do you imagine that Putin is really concerned about that? Probably not.
Exactly.
Yeah, perhaps a cyber response of some sort. The problem with cyber response is it's still an unknown battlefield. We don't know what an appropriate proportional response looks like and where that would take us down the road.
Christian, let me just get you quickly on that and how NATO's role will play in this. I guess like Mike, I'm having a hard time envisioning a land invasion like this, but I guess that's what we're possibly in for. What is the U.S. role in that if it happens, and what is NATO's role?
Well, there is a chance that NATO could drag us into something here. You recall the Libya operation was actually France and Britain going against Gaddafi. And in fact, when they ran out of smart bombs, something like a week into the operation, the United States have to come in. President Obama reluctantly becoming engaged. This Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, gave some very reassuring language of Ukraine and had to walk it back, sort of noting that Ukraine is not actually a member. There's not a mutual defense agreement in place. So they're going to sort of provide encouragement, intelligence, perhaps selling arms, the U.S. or NATO. But it's this, Putin sort of looks at this and sees a whole lot of bluster and not a lot of true deterrence and threat, except that from Ukraine itself.
All right, we'll see what comes of this call tomorrow morning, 10:30 Eastern. Let's get you guys on China right now. The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki talking today about the diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics. Here's part of what she said.
Not sending a U.S. delegation sends a clear message that we cannot conduct ourselves with business as usual, that we are not in a state where business as usual is appropriate. At the same time, we believe U.S. athletes, people who have been training, giving up a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, preparing for these Olympics, should be able to go and compete, and we look forward to cheering for them from home.
Mike, you talk about sanctions against Russia not really going anywhere. Does this message to China go anywhere?
Well, they'll be irritated by it. The Chinese government puts a lot of stock in sort of protocol and process and image. So they will be irritated, but it's not going to change their behavior. Look, so far, the only organization that's shown any cojones when it comes to China in the recent past has been the Women's Tennis Association, by saying we're not going to hold any more tournaments in China or Hong Kong. Everything else is just kabuki theater here. There's no, so I really don't think she's going to look at this and go, oh my God, they're not sending the vice president, or they're not sending the first lady. Right. What shall we do?
All right, Christian, one other thing we wanted to get you on. The Wall Street Journal now reporting that Beijing's trying to establish a military base on the Atlantic side of Africa's coast. How big of a development and a possible threat? What does this mean?
It's alarming if you look also in sequence that China has previously established a presence in the Horn of Africa. And so this is an extension of that. I wouldn't imagine large Chinese flotillas being present in the Atlantic anytime soon. Probably, though, it is a replenishment option if they want to put intelligence gathering ships or send a submarine into the Atlantic. It's certainly something we ought to oppose. We ought to make it very clear to African countries or any country that, they choose China or they choose us, and there's going to be a cost. And I hope the administration does that. So it's not a cause for panic, but it's just consistent with China expanding its horizons in the military sphere and the intelligence sphere consistently.
All right. Well, we'll see again what comes of the call, at least with Russia, tomorrow morning, 10:30 Eastern. Christian Whiten, former State Department senior advisor, and Mike Baker, former CIA operative. Always great to have both your voices. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shifting gears now from outside our border to on the southern border, where the Biden administration has just reinstated the Remain in Mexico policy starting today. For more on this policy, I want to bring on Brandon Judd, the president of the National Border Patrol Council. Brandon, it's good to have you again. What, in your opinion, changes today? I mean, is this the flip of a switch? Are there dramatic changes at the border today?
Well, it could be a flip of the switch if the Biden administration implements this program properly. The problem right now is we've seen very little development. They're talking about doing a pilot program. They're talking about implementing it slowly when we don't need to do that. We've already been running this program. We ran this program for well over a year in the Trump administration. We know exactly what needs to be done. The problem is we think that the Biden administration is slow walking this, trying to challenge the courts on this and overturn the migrant protection protocols. But let me be clear. If the administration implements this properly and correctly, this will be a game changer. We will see numbers on the southwest border drop dramatically if they do it differently. If they do it like what they did with Title 42, the health code that says that we expel people under the COVID protocols, if they do it like that, if they make large cutouts for different people, for different segments of people from different countries, then this program is going to fail just like Title 42 failed.
It has been implemented, has it not, Brandon, in El Paso and San Diego, at least initially? Is that right? That's where it's starting?
It has, but it's just been, like I said, it's been a trickle. It's been a trickle of people. Very few people have been enrolled into Title 42, and that's the slow walking that I'm talking about. Again, we have to implement this properly, and if we don't, it's just not going to work.
How does it impact the actual work that the agents do, Brandon? I mean, when this is in place, and if it's in place widespread, as you say, how does it impact their work and improve what you think is, I guess, in a better way, and how does it lead to fewer people coming across?
Well, initially, it causes the workload to go up a little bit. But as the MPP is implemented and people understand that they're not going to be released into the United States, then a lot less people come. And when people come, then the workload goes down. And the reason why we want the workload to go down is we want to go after the criminal cartels. We want to go after the criminality on the border. We want to go after the human smugglers. We don't want to take people into custody, just release them into the United States. Under the asylum program, when the cartels coach these individuals on what they need to say in order to be released into the United States. We want to go after the criminality. And if we can drop the numbers of illegal border crossers, then we can go after the drugs that are flooding into our communities and killing so many of our children.
Yeah, when the former President Trump implemented this in 19, Brandon, as you well know, the number of border crossings actually went up, at least initially, and then we had the pandemic and the numbers came back down. We've had several people on this broadcast say we should right now put Remain in Mexico back in place. Does it work, though, Brandon? And are there any things, other things, I guess, that are at work that are impacting these numbers?
It does work, and we saw that under the Trump administration. It literally was, as you said before, it was like a light switch. The moment we implemented the Migrant Protection Protocol, or Remain in Mexico program, the number of illegal border crossers dropped exponentially. They knew they weren't going to be rewarded for crossing our borders illegally. That's the magnet that draws so many people to come to our borders in the first place. That's what the cartels are able to go into these countries and advertise. They say, all you have to do is give us a couple $1,000s. We'll bring you to the United States. We'll teach you what you need to say. Once you cross into the United States, give yourself up and you'll be released. When we stop releasing people, when we send them back to Mexico, or when we hold them in custody here in the United States, those numbers drop exponentially.
All right, Brandon Judd, president of the National Border Patrol Council. It's great to have you tonight, Brandon. Thanks for the time.
Joe, always good to talk to you.
All right, take care. Jussie Smollett takes the stand in his own defense. We'll have the highlights of that testimony ahead. And we'll ask a criminal defense lawyer, is someone going to face perjury charges once this case is over? Plus, the mayor of New York worried about Omicron. So he's announced the first in the nation vaccine mandate that goes into effect 3 weeks from now. Why the wait? And is it legal? Don't forget, you can follow us on social media at The Donlin Report on Twitter. Back after this. Actor Jussie Smollett took the witness stand today in his own defense against charges he arranged a fake hate crime, paying two brothers to pretend to beat him up on a frigid night back in January of 2019. He testified today that his relationship with one of the key witnesses in the case was indeed sexual. Let's get more now from News Nation's Kelly Beeson. She's live tonight outside the courtroom in Chicago. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Joe, that's right. Well, when Jussie Smollett took the stand, he talked a little bit about his past, saying that he grew up in a tight-knit family of 6 children, that he came to terms with his sexuality in his early 20s, and he also said that he took the role he did on Empire as a black and gay singer because he had never seen a black man portrayed that way in media before. He also went on to talk about in detail the relationship he had with the brothers who were involved in this incident, saying that one of the brothers, Abimbola Oshundero, was a gentleman he met in 2017 at a club. He said the two would later participate in doing drugs together, that they would also have a relationship that involved sex acts, doing those sex acts together. However, that was something that Oshundero said never happened. Now, at the heart of this, the defense is claiming that the attack on Smollett was sincere, saying that the two brothers involved harbored homophobic feelings. However, the brothers have testified that they took part in this alleged plot as a way to gain favor with Smollett and as a way to advance their own careers. Joe?
All right, Kelly, I'm wondering what was said, if anything, about the decision to put Smollett on the stand, and also, has the prosecution started the cross-examination yet?
Well, we don't know just yet. There are no cameras allowed inside of the courtroom. However, that's a very interesting point you bring up, Joe. And one thing that I do want to mention about this case is the fact that there is no penalty for not testifying. However, there is a bit of a risk in putting Jussie Smollett up on the stand. If the judge feels that he perjured himself, that could extend the prison or jail time that he's now looking at, which could be up to 3 years. Joe.
All right, interesting point, and we're going to use that to bring in our next guest. Kelly Beeson, thank you very much. Here he is, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor Arthur Aidala. All right, Arthur, I mean, let's start, I guess, with that, because my first question today is, where does perjury come into this trial? Because someone's lying, that much we know.
Well, you know, it's not typical for a defendant to be charged with perjury. However, there's kind of this unwritten rule in all jurisdictions that when the defendant testifies and then he or she is convicted by 12 people who obviously didn't believe their testimony, that judges take that into consideration. In this particular jurisdiction, it's in writing, it's part of the law, but it kind of holds true in all jurisdictions. You know, there's a saying in New York on a homicide case, you know, if the defendant doesn't testify, he gets 20 years, but if he does and is found guilty, he gets the full 25. So this is all about credibility. You have basically, it's a he said, right. And I think what Jussie Smollett was trying to come out with today was, look, I did know these people because part of the prosecutor's case was he's a stranger. He wasn't that big of a celebrity that people would know who he was and were just going to do this to him and to try to make money, et cetera, et cetera. So he told his side of the story, which was, he said, was very embarrassing. You know, his mom is there. He's talking about doing drugs. He's talking about being in bathhouses. He said, I'm very embarrassed today. And, you know, you saw those sketches that you don't see what the jurors look like, but I would be very curious to see what their reactions were when he was testifying.
On the one hand, Arthur, they're saying they attacked him because they were homophobic, and on the other hand, he testified today that he had a sexual relationship with one of them.
Which doesn't ring true. Now they denied that there was any kind of sexual relationship. He's admitting to the sexual relationship. And, you know, this really comes down to things like body language, how someone is breathing, how they handle themselves, how they're going to handle themselves under cross-examination, right, which is yet to happen. And, you know, what we tell jurors is we're not asking you to check your common sense out at the door. The same way you use your common sense to judge other people's credibility throughout life, that's what they're going to do here with both the prosecution's witnesses and with Mr. Smollett.
All right, Arthur, we want to talk to you a little bit about, since you're in New York, the vaccine mandate today that Mayor de Blasio has put into effect for all private businesses. Here's some of what he said.
It is time. Look, this is how we put health and safety first, by ensuring that there is a vaccine mandate that reaches everyone universally in the private sector. A lot of folks in the private sector have said to me they believe in vaccination, but they're not quite sure how they can do it themselves. Well, we're going to do it.
I had a few questions about this, Arthur. Why did they, in the city, why do they need this? Why don't businesses just do it? Why would businesses need the city to mandate this?
Well, I think his point, because I did watch the news conference, I think his point was, and I know people in law firms who people don't want to get vaccinated, and this kind of gives them an excuse. I believe I read in one report, this is breaking news, but it's a $17,000 fine if you get caught, if someone's working past December 27th without the vaccination. So I think this gives certain employers who want all of their employees to be vaccinated an excuse. On the flip side, though, Joe, you just put up a graphic. There's 184,000 businesses in New York.
Right.
It's impossible to enforce it. What are they going to have? Police officers going into every law firm, every accounting firm, every doctor's office. So it's more of a very strongly worded suggestion. And the reason why I'm not sure if it's necessary is, statistically speaking, the statistics we're getting here in New York is that 90% of the population in New York City is vaccinated. He's trying to make a preemptive strike regarding the new, I always mispronounce
Omicron,
it.
it's good enough.
Thank you, Omicron, the variant that's coming out. And there are some conversations that he's trying to appeal to the left-leaning voters because Mayor de Blasio now wants to run for governor.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was wondering if it's such a threat there in New York, why is he waiting until December 27th? Isn't it a threat right now? And he's out of office 4 days after that.
Well, people are up in arms. Certain people are up in arms that it's such a short amount of time. I will tell you, Joe, personally, what I'm a little up in arms about is I have a 5-year-old son, and he just turned 5, and now they're saying he has to have the vaccine before he can go out to certain places. And I'm not sure if I want my little boy, who's 40 pounds, to put this into his system at this point in his life. So there's a lot of conversations to go on, but the courts keep backing up these mandates. So let's see what's going to happen going forward.
Not the federal one, Arthur. I mean, President Biden's, that one got pitched out.
Correct. But here in New York, all the mandates keep getting upheld by the state judges and by the federal judges.
All right. Arthur, it's always great to have your voice from New York. We appreciate all the insight. Take care.
Thank you very much, Joe.
A Kentucky congressman went viral for what many call a poorly timed and tone-deaf Christmas card. Would we be talking about this if the Oxford shooting hadn't happened? We'll get into that ahead. Plus, several police departments across the country taking action to prevent smash and grab robberies, but AOC is downplaying them. Why? We'll get into that as well ahead. As more details come out in the Oxford High School shooting, more questions arise about the events leading up to that day. Police say 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley shot and killed 4 students and injured several others. We know Crumbley's parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, are facing 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. But what role might the school have had in failing to stop this tragedy? Let's bring in now News Nation's Brian Entin for more on that. Brian?
Yeah, Joe, you know, the school is now under the microscope, and the school staff are also being scrutinized. I spoke with the Michigan Attorney General. She was very, very clear with me that it is possible that people in that school could face charges. A lot of people in this community not happy with the way the school handled this entire situation, Joe. You'll remember Ethan Crumbley, the alleged shooter, was called to the office, to the counselor's office, because a teacher was so alarmed by his behavior and saw a very disturbing drawing and note. So he goes to the counselor's office. They're so alarmed that they call Ethan Crumbley's parents to the school. The superintendent said in a new letter that the parents refused to take their son home. So the school office sent Ethan Crumbley back to the classroom. And that is what has so many parents and people in this community so upset right now. And we know that is now part of what could possibly be a criminal investigation.
Well, beyond that, Brian, I guess they had the right, did they not, to search him, his backpack, his locker, or anything else if they were that concerned, right?
Absolutely. They for sure had the right, but they apparently did not search his backpack. And what is so upsetting to think about is that he was in that school office and he likely had that gun in his backpack and went right back to the classroom, and it was just a short time later that the shooting happened.
Right. We pointed that out on Friday as well. If you're the parent sitting in that meeting, how can you not ask yourself or your son there, where is the gun? Brian, one other thing. There was, I guess, in Detroit over the weekend, the parents were found. What about the person who, I guess, was connected to this artist studio where they were located?
Yeah, it was a wild weekend, Joe. Saturday morning, they found these parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley. Their attorney says, oh, they were going to turn themselves in. They were just waiting. Sheriff told us over the weekend, look, this was a manhunt. He says they were hiding in an artist studio in Detroit. The artist was questioned today. We know that his home is being searched right now. He apparently has some kind of connection to the Crumbleys. He actually did a mural in Oxford and may have met Jennifer Crumbley that way. His attorney says very clearly that he did not know there was a manhunt.
All right, Brian Entin live for us tonight in Michigan. Thanks for the update, Brian. A Republican congressman facing fierce criticism for his pro-gun tweet just days after 4 teenagers were killed in that school shooting in Michigan. Thomas Massey of Kentucky posted this photo on Saturday showing family members gathered around a Christmas tree, all holding firearms. The caption read, "Merry Christmas, P.S. Santa, please bring ammo." I want to bring in now Mo Kelly, host of the Mo Kelly radio show in L.A., and Tony Katz. He's the host of Eat, Drink, Smoke, the podcast. Tony, let's start with you. Is this bad timing or is it just plain bad optics?
It's not even a thing. With all due respect to everybody, maybe they don't deserve the respect. It's not a thing. This has nothing to do with what took place in Michigan, which is an absolutely horrible story. And you just went through all of the things that went on there that can have us asking a lot of questions. This is a conversation about the fact that ammunition is scarce in the United States and the Massey family wants some. The fact that they're holding firearms doesn't scare anybody, doesn't threaten anybody. And the people who are scared by those things are the people who want to perpetuate fear from firearms as opposed to learning about firearms. It's all posturing and not a story.
All right, Mo, I'll let you give a crack at this, but the Twitterverse, as we all know, just had a field day with this. There was one I read that said, "Christian minister here, what is wrong with you?"
It's real simple. You just have to read the room. There's no one saying that they couldn't do it. It's just, would you want to? Should you in this moment? Just being aware of the larger mood in America. And I don't think that you needed to have AR-15s or assault rifles to get across the point of gun safety or teaching people about the need or the use of guns in our society. I'm pro-Second Amendment. I have no problem with people using guns, but I'm also aware of how certain messages can be misconstrued in a certain moment. And as a politician, you should know better, even if you're not willing to do better.
Yeah, Tony, I guess that would be one of the criticisms, though. So in social media, this is sort of an own goal. I mean, why create a controversy like this when you don't really have to? And the critics say it's kind of politically tone deaf. To your point, sure, you can do it, but it's just probably not a good idea at this point right now.
They didn't create a problem. This was going to be something that was excoriated by people no matter what, Michigan and Oxford or not. So the idea that somehow it's tone deaf, that's not going to fly. That dog won't hunt. This is about people who are anti-gun, utilizing any moment to say, see what's wrong with these people. There's nothing wrong with people exercising their rights as Americans. What's wrong with people are people who are upset with those who exercise their rights as Americans.
All right, let's move on. One other issue we want to get you both on, the issue of the vice president's office and the issues that she is having. Kamala Harris not going away. The Washington Post reporting now on her management style. Some folks in her office saying that she's unprepared, she's hard on her employees, and the common denominator on all of this, Mo, is her. I mean, these were important roles. People are leaving on her staff. This doesn't look good for her.
As a person who's long worked in the media, I have to say, not only does the vice president need a win in the media, after a certain point, if you just have this singular message that either she's difficult to work with or is unprepared, then that will be the reality, because the perception will be the reality. And if you can't really take the politics out of it, but if I were a Democrat, I'd be very concerned, because if she is supposed to be the heir apparent to the Oval Office to run behind Joe Biden, then it's not shaping up in the way that as a Democratic Party, I think would want it to be. It may be untrue, but until there's a counter narrative, it is true.
Tony, what do you think this does to her political aspirations? I mean, she didn't even make it to Iowa in 2020.
Which should have been a conversation that the Bidens had before selecting her for the vice presidency. But Mo's dead on. Perception is reality in this case. And really that part two, that conversation we would all have to admit is happening everywhere, high and low in the Democratic Party. There is no heir apparent at this moment. The vice president isn't it. I think they're trying to make Pete Buttigieg the case as the heir apparent, but it's like trying to make fetch happen. It's not happening. They have a real issue. This is the last thing they they could have wanted when they take a look at energy prices, when they take a look at the border, when they take a look at Taiwan and China or Russia and the Ukraine. This is not what they need, but it sure is what they got.
It seems like they did think they had this taken care of in 2020. It's a great insight from both of you. Great to see you both. Mo Kelly, our friend out in L.A. there from the Mo Kelly Show, and Tony Katz. Want to mention your new book quickly. It's called Let's Go Bourbon. I see what you did there.
It is the great bourbon reader, recipes, history, a lot of good stuff. Go enjoy at Amazon. Let's go.
Mo and Tony, thanks for the time. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon. Several retailers across the country have recently been affected by a wave of smash and grab style robberies. We've been covering them here on the broadcast. We've seen all the video. Number of people run into a store, grab merchandise, and run out. Many of them get away. Retailers are the ones fronting the costs, some even now shutting down as a result. But now Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is coming under fire from both conservatives and store owners for saying there's no data backing up these robberies, and the allegations are, quote, not panning out. Joining me now for more on this, retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. All right, Sergeant, am I missing something? Because it sure seems like there are a lot of cities around the country having big problems.
Yeah, listen, I mean, they kill me with these datas. They always want to have a blue ribbon panel to prove a point. We don't need data. We've got video. Obviously, it's happening, and it's happening in record numbers to the dismay of store owners who probably some are going to go out of business.
Yeah, the crime spree on the street, Sergeant, to say that it's because of what's happened with the pandemic, I guess maybe it might be part of it, but I guess I'm just not sure why we can't acknowledge that this is happening. It's getting worse, and a lot of retailers around the country are starting to take steps, and our cities, to try to address it. You know, it's sure attrition, resignation, retirements, all of this is part of it, but I mean, this is actually happening.
Yeah, and listen, we're in the holiday season, and this is not uncommon for these types of crimes to uptick during the holidays. Opportunists will see an opportunity and they'll take advantage of a situation. And so they've seen that these smash and grabs in large numbers work. Let's do it again.
Yeah, let's get you on a couple other things here, Sergeant. Restaurant in San Francisco, you may have heard about this, apologizing now for asking 3 officers to leave because the officers were armed and it made the staff uncomfortable. I remember the days when they used to welcome police officers and felt safer when they were in there. What's happening?
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, I don't know if that's really the reason. That's what they said, and that's their story. They're sticking to it. But note to self, if I'm a cop and that's a pop spot, that's the term we use, and we eat in there all the time, and you don't want my business, I'm not going to go because I don't want that special sauce you might give me if I come again.
Right. All right. There's another one, too, here. This happened in Minneapolis at an Aldi store. I don't know if you saw this, Sergeant, but it was an arrest, I guess, caught on video that went viral. Here's the clip.
What are you doing? You're supposed to de-escalate. How is this de-escalating? How the is this de-escalating, dog? What are you doing? What's your badge number? Badge number. What are you doing? What are you doing? Why is he under arrest? Why is he under arrest? He did nothing. He did nothing for this. Why are you putting your hands on me?
Sergeant, critics say he should be disciplined. He was there to de-escalate the situation, not what he ultimately did. What'd you see?
Absolutely. This officer created a situation when there wasn't one. He put hands on an elderly gentleman, a 64-year-old man, and then got embarrassed because he couldn't get this man to comply. This cop was fat, out of shape, and the only thing he knew to do then was to just manhandle him and try to throw him on the ground. And we saw for 5 minutes, he still couldn't get this 64-year-old man down on the ground. And so once backup arrived, he did what all cops do when they put hands on you. They make an arrest for refusing to comply, obstruction of justice. I promise you, when this thing settles, that man will be dismissed due to insufficient evidence for the charges of obstruction.
Well, the police chief in Minneapolis has had enough and has said now that he will resign in January. It's sort of the climate we're in now with the burnout and everything else we've talked about. It's always great to have Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey with us. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Senator Bob Dole will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol Thursday. Coming up next, we'll remember him with one of his longtime speechwriters. He has some great stories to tell, including one about the senator's sense of humor and more. That's ahead. Bob Dole, the last World War II veteran to become a presidential party nominee, died yesterday, leaving a legacy behind which is starkly different than what you often find in politics today. Dole spent his life in service, enlisting in the U.S. Army Reserves. During World War II, he suffered wounds on an Italian battlefield, spending more than 2 years in a military hospital and losing full use of his right arm. Overcoming those injuries, Dole later rose to become senator, Senate Republican leader, and GOP presidential nominee. He shared that sense of service with counterparts from the war, including President George Herbert Walker Bush, whom he memorably and movingly saluted at the former president's funeral. That's video we wanted to make sure we brought up tonight as we talk about this with an old friend of mine from my Portland days, Kerry Timchuk. He knew the senator well. He was Dole's chief speechwriter from 91 to 96. Kerry, I have to tell you, when I heard the news yesterday, you were literally the first person I thought about, and I wanted to bring you on the show. What went through your mind when you got the news yesterday?
Gosh, Joe, well, thank you. It's good to see you again. It wasn't a surprise. He was 98, had been in ill health, but still at the end of an era. He was, in my mind, the greatest member of the greatest generation.
Yeah, he was. Tell me about the last project you worked on with him, because it was an op-ed, as I understood, that marked the anniversary of his last day in the Senate. And he talked a lot about what we talk about on this broadcast, which is leadership.
Absolutely. It was June, this past June. It was the 25th anniversary of his, the day he left the Senate, where he gave his farewell speech that Democrats and Republicans gave a standing ovation to. And he wanted to reflect on the years since then and the lessons he learned, and impart some lessons to his former colleagues in the House and Senate. And it was all about the need for bipartisanship, that we should be Americans first, Republicans and Democrats second, that compromise is not a dirty word. Compromise is how you make progress, and that's what he did many, many times as leader in the Senate.
It has become sort of a dirty word, though, Kerry. Why aren't there more Bob Doles in politics today? I mean, he endorsed President Trump in 2016, but I sort of get the impression he'd sort of be a rhino today, maybe, right?
He would. I mean, you look back at his record, and he understood that it wasn't my way or the highway for him. It was, you had to work together with the Democrats. And in that last speech he gave on the Senate floor in '96, he said he realized that his biggest accomplishments were those that he did with Democrats. Saving Social Security with Patrick Moynihan, the American with Disabilities Act with Tom Harkin, many bills with Ted Kennedy, George McGovern, food stamps and international food programs. He and McGovern were very close, and people couldn't imagine that. Here was, conservative Republican Dole and liberal Democrat McGovern, but they were very close friends and made a real difference by working together.
The other thing people might not realize about him, Kerry, was his sense of humor. We dug up something that we thought of today, so let's play this clip when he appeared on the David Letterman show right after he lost to Bill Clinton in '96.
Bob, what have you been doing lately? Not, apparently not enough, but in any event, I had a question for the president. Yeah? Yeah, how about 2 out of 3?
I mean, Kerry, he had a great sense of humor, and that shows, I think, the political sportsmanship that he also embraced, especially after what we saw in 2020.
Absolutely, and I was with him there at the Letterman show. Just 3 days after the election, there he is, laughing about it. And, he often said that good leaders not only need strong backbones, they need strong funny bones. And he saw humor as part of the art of leadership. I worked with him on 2 books he did after leaving the Senate, one called Great Political Wit, Laughing Almost All the Way to the White House, and one called Great Presidential Wit, I Wish I Was in This Book, by Bob Dole. and we did the first ever ranking of presidents by their sense of humor, from the least funniest president, the biggest sticks in the mud, to the funniest president.
There was another
ranking. What we discovered in doing our research is that presidents who we rated as having the worst sense of humor were presidents who historians have rated as the least successful. And presidents that had the best sense of humor were presidents historians have ranked as among the most successful. And Senator Dole said it proved his point that, as his hero Dwight Eisenhower once said, humor is part of the art of leadership. It's part of getting things done. And I can remember countless meetings with senators where they'd be at loggerheads and fighting, couldn't reach an agreement, and Senator Dole would come in, a one-liner, make a joke, kid somebody, get everybody laughing, and suddenly they were on a path to reach a compromise.
I know the other ranking was for compassion, and you told me every year there were surveys of the folks in the Senate who ranked the 5
Absolutely,
nicest.
Joe. Every year, Capitol Hill newspaper did a survey of the waiters and waitresses in the coffee shops, the security guards.
They all loved him.
The janitors.
Hey,
and
Kerry,
they would ask them confidentially to rate the 5 nicest and 5 nastiest senators.
Yeah.
And a runaway winner every year for nicest senator was Bob Dole.
I could talk to you
because
for
he treated everybody like a senator, no matter where they were.
The importance.
His decency, his civility showed not just to his colleagues in the House and Senate, but to everybody he encountered.
All right, we're out of time. Carrie, I wish we had another hour. It's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Say hi to everybody back in Portland for me.
Will do, Joe. We miss you.
All right, take care. On Balance with Wieland Vittert starts at the top of the hour. You know, the other thing I wanted to get to with him was he told me that Bob, of all of the titles he had, veteran was the one he loved the most.
Well, and that sense of service that Bob Dole had in service to other veterans, it was very common back when I was in Washington, D.C. from 2014 to most recently, that you would see Bob Dole show up at the honor flights that would bring World War II veterans to the World War II Memorial. You would have Bob Dole there to greet them, and he viewed that as part of his duty and his continuing service.
All right, what do you have tonight?
Interesting story about Bill de Blasio's new vaccine mandate in New York City on every private employer. Nothing really says altruistic politician who really believes in something like announcing it on MSNBC Morning Joe this morning. So we're going to get into that. You know, we're wondering whether he's going for MSNBC contributor or whether he's just announcing his run for governor.
Sure. Well, that's what Arthur Aidala thought earlier tonight on our broadcast. We'll look for that much more.
Yeah, I'm in good company of Arthur.
Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.